Hi there, and as always, thank you for joining me. Today we are looking at compound measures. So this is a situation where three different measurements are interconnected, and we can find one of those measurements provided we know the other two. Three examples to look at. If this seems a little complicated to start with, then let's get on with it and have a look. So I mentioned in the introduction that we were looking at combinations of three measurements. I'm going to take a look at the first set, and I think this set is slightly more straightforward. They're more familiar to us, and those are the measurements of distance, speed and time. So if we have a look as to how they are related, let's take speed. Let's imagine that we are travelling at 20 kilometers per hour. So that means each hour we travelled 20 kilometres. Now let's say that we are travelling for 5 hours. Okay, notice that the units are the same, hours and hours. So 20 kilometres per hour. We are travelling 5 hours, so that's 20 times 5. So at the end of the 5 hours, we will have travelled 100 kilometres. Now, that means that if we have the speed and we multiply by the time, that gives us the distance. So we have a relationship here. Speed times time is distance. Now, in fact, this can work several ways round. Let's pick another example. Let's say that we have travelled 120 kilometres, and that is the total distance, and we have been travelling for 6 hours. Now in this case we've got the distance, we've got the time, so if we've travelled 120 kilometres in 6 hours, if we divide 120 by 6, that means we have been travelling at 20 kilometers per hour. So in this example, first of all we have the distance and we are dividing by the time, and that gives us the speed. So it's the same thing, only the other way around. Speed times time is distance. Distance divided by time is speed. And there is a third one to look at using these same three, and that is where we look at the distance. Let's say we have travelled 200 kilometres, and we know that our average speed was 40 kilometres per hour. So if we've travelled a total of 200 and we've managed 40 kilometres each hour, if I take the 200 and divide by 40, that means we have been travelling for 5 hours. So in this one we've now got distance divided by speed equals time. All a little bit complicated and quite easy to confuse. So let's now try to make this a little bit simpler. Now take a look at this. A triangle, and it's been broken up into 3 sections, D, S, T. So these are the 3 units that we've been talking about: distance, speed and time. Now the reason they are written like this, because this acts as a guide as to how we work out the calculations. So if we think about the previous page, we came up with 3 different formulas. The first of those was speed multiplied by time equals distance. We also had distance divided by speed equals time, and we had distance divided by time equals speed. So how does this triangle help us? Well, the idea is to actually, in the case of an exam or something, is to use your thumb. I will just use a black circle. Okay, imagine you have an exam question and you are being told the distance and you are being told the speed. The question you will then be asked is, what is the time? So, if you take your thumb and you place it over the unit that you are looking for, in this case we've been asked to find the time, your thumb will cover up the t and you are left with d over s. And of course, d over s means distance divided by speed. So d divided by s is time. That is the centre one of these two. Okay, if I now go to a question where I am being asked to find the speed of a journey, then I put my thumb over the s. This now leaves us with distance over time. Distance divided by time is speed. There we go. That is the bottom one there. Let's change things again. Let's say the question is actually giving us the speed and the time and asking you for the distance. You put your thumb over the distance and we are left with st, speed multiplied by time. That gives you distance. So speed times time equals distance. So summarize again, what are we doing? We are looking at an exam question whereby you are being given two units. You are either given distance and speed and asked to find the time, or you are being given speed and time, being asked to find the distance, or you're being given time and distance and asked to find the speed. You are given 2 out of 3. So what we are simply doing is saying, which one am I looking for? If it's time, the circle or your thumb goes over time, and that is your guide. It's distance divided by speed. If your thumb goes over the speed, because that's what you're looking for, it's distance over time. If your thumb goes on the d, it's speed times time. That will give you the distance. So we are using this little diagram and your thumb to give you the formula that you need to find your answer. Now let's have a look at the second situation, and these are when we are working with the units mass, density and volume. Now, without going through every example, these three work in exactly the same way as the first set we looked at. So the mass of an object is dependent on its density and its volume, and so on. You can work out one from the other three. These seem slightly more complicated because maybe we're not so familiar in working with them, but it works in exactly the same way. So again, if I have a question where I am given the mass and the density and I want to work out the volume, I put my thumb over volume and I've got mass over density. So mass divided by density equals volume. Moving on again, if I am given the density and the volume and I want to find the mass, put my thumb over the mass and I've got density times volume equals mass. And of course the third situation, if I am looking to find the density of something, by putting my thumb over it, it tells me that I need to take the mass and divide it by volume. So wherever I put my thumb, it tells me how to calculate. If it's one over the other, it's divide. If it's the two side by side, it's multiply. And there is a third set of units that work in exactly the same way. So let's take a quick look. And that third scenario include the units of force, pressure and area. Now this one might seem the most complicated because unless you also study physics, they're probably less familiar. But all we need to know as far as our maths questions is concerned is that these three units work in exactly the same way as the other two examples. So, using our thumb again, if we have a question that is asking us for the area and it is giving us the force and pressure, I'm going to look at units a little bit later on in this, then we know that F over P, so force divided by pressure, equals area. Similarly, if I move the circle to cover pressure, I am left with F over A, so F divided by A equals P. And finally, if I move my thumb over force, I am looking for a question asking me for force, then I know that P times A, they are side by side, equals force. So I can work out one from the other two. We need to look a little bit at units on this, so I'm going to pick some typical exam questions and work through those. So our first question tells us that Jack takes a bike ride. He rides for 30 minutes at a speed of 20 kilometers per hour. And the question is, how far does he travel? So this time we are being asked for the distance. That is the question. Now, first of all, we need to look at the units involved here, because the speed is kilometers per hour, but the time we are given is minutes. For a triangle like this to work, the units have to be the same, so we're going to have to convert. In this case, 30 minutes is half an hour, which is 0.5 hours. That's the first thing we have to do, get the units to match up in order for this to work. The question is now, what are we being asked to find? And the answer is the distance, how far. So we are looking to find the distance, therefore that is where you would place your thumb, over the distance. What have we got here? We've got speed and time side by side, so we are looking speed times time equal to the distance. We know the speed is 20 kilometers per hour, and we know the time. Don't forget we've changed it into hours so that it matches up, so that's 0.5. 20 times 0.5 is 10, and again the units we are using is kilometers, so that's your answer. And here's a question with the mass density volume triangle. It says an object measuring 2 meters cubed weighs 250 kilograms. Well, let's have a look at what we have. 2 meters cubed, that's how big it is, so we have the volume. It weighs 250 kilograms, so we have the mass, and we've been asked for the density. So we're going to put our thumb over density, and that is going to leave us with mass divided by volume. So mass, we said the mass was 250 kilograms, divided by the volume, which was 2 meters cubed, and the answer is going to be 125. We then have to put the units. Well, it's mass over volume, and that's what we quote as the units. It's 125 kilograms per meters cubed. And finally, the one that I think is the most horrible, it's the force, pressure and area triangle. Here's a question, an area of 10 meters squared, so okay, that's area, is put under a pressure, okay, we've got pressure, of 5, now here's where it becomes horrible, there are some possibly unfamiliar units here, a pressure of 5 pascals. Now a pascal is a Newton per meter squared. Newton is the unit of force. I've written here, force is measured in newtons. And we're being asked for the force. So, putting all this complicated unit thing to one side, we have the area, we have the pressure, we are looking for the force. So let's put our thumb over the force. That means we are looking for pressure times area. Pressure is 5 multiplied by area, which is 10, which equals 50. That is the force. Force is measured in newtons. Therefore, the answer is 50N. And that's it. A few things to memorize, the triangles in particular. After that, follow the routine, you should be fine. If you found that useful, please, as always, do subscribe. The button's down here below, and there's another video at the side here that you might also find useful. Thank you for joining me.